Story 1. "Hey, get the fuck off my son!" I barked, storming towards our couch, suitcase falling from my grasp somewhere along the way. Yuli planted a firm hand on my chest as I tried to pass her, asking what my problem was. She insisted that I must be exhausted from the flight, that I wasn't thinking straight, but I could feel the subtext. The insinuation was as plain as day. She thought I was ass over tits drunk, or worse, right in front of our son, something I'd promised never to be guilty of again. Heat gathered under my shirt collar, a flush crept up my face. I was sober. Stone cold sober. Dry as a goddamn ditch. I mean, she was the one who'd allowed that freak into our home. She was the one who was letting them lounge on our kid's lap like nothing was wrong. How did I know she wasn't on something? Wordlessly, I ripped Julie's hand away and rushed past her. Dad, what's the matter? It's just Raja, Dad." Tears began flooding. It hurt to make Ike upset, yes, but that hurt was nothing compared to the fear I felt, the raw, blistering confusion of it all. It was the gentle sparks of a firecracker versus the roiling fireball of a ballistic missile. No contest. I loomed over the brown leather sectional. Ike slid out from under them and scampered over the top of the couch, sprinting into his mother's trembling arms as soon as his feet hit the floor. The person dressed to look like our house cat didn't even react. Knees to their chest, curled and comfortable, they placed a painted 5-fingered hand up to their mouth and rubbed their palm against their mask. I suppose they were simulating self-cleaning, but the mask didn't have a hole for a tongue to come out of, so their skin just squeaked against the material. My eyelids twitched. Icy sweat drenched my back. I looked to my wife for answers, but she just seemed terrified. Terrified of me. What is this?" I whispered, knuckles collapsing into a fist. Ike whimpered. My wife raked his beach blonde hair, silent, wide-eyed. "Who is this Julie?" The dry, crackling scream sent her dashing to the kitchen table, where her phone was resting. Ike transitioned into full-on hysteria. And very much like a cat, the intruder appeared perfectly indifferent to our mounting duress. They stopped, faux-licking their palm and stretched wide, shifting their stomach towards me, unafraid, unbothered, unprotected. I stared at them, disbelief running dizzy laps around the base of my skull. They were around 5 feet tall, mask included, which was circular, stout, flattened at the top, triple the size of a human skull, and circumferentially smooth. The shape reminded me of the box I used to store my extra drum cymbals. Our Calico's likeness had been meticulously painted across the mask. Her emerald green eyes, the black splotch surrounding her light pink nose, the ragged edges of her left ear, it was all there and accounted for. To fit the mask's bizarre dimensions, however, those familiar features needed to be distorted. Everything was a little too wide and a little too big. It was the same with their gaunt, emaciated body. They'd faithfully translated the markings of her fur onto their skin, stretching the pattern to fit over their ghoulish proportions. A patch of white over their sunken, craterous abdomen. Speckles of soft orange along their forearms, extremities which had cords of tendon revoltingly visible because of the way their thin skin wrapped tightly around their fatless frame. Worst of all, they were naked. No genitals, though. The crease was sleek and seamless, like a Ken doll. My rage boiled over. I descended, ready to cave their chest in with my bare hands. "Marvin, Jesus Christ, it's just a cat. Get a hold of yourself," Julie blared. My fist halted inches from their breastbone. They didn't flinch. I creaked upright so I could see my wife's eyes. You think they're a cat? You think this is Raja?" Ike was beyond hysterics at that point, shrieking, inconsolable, face pressed hard into her pant leg. Julie didn't answer. She pulled Ike away, into another room, urgently muttering to the 911 dispatcher. "Yes, he's on something, or drunk, or sick, I don't know. Just get someone over here." My mouth felt dry. I ran a quivering hand through my sweat-caked hair, slicking it back, wanted to look somewhat presentable when the police arrived. All the while they loafed on the couch. Sleeping, smiling, laughing, watching, waiting. I couldn't tell. The mask had no holes and they never spoke. I stood in front of the couch, lightly swaying, an empty swing shivering in a cold wind, observing patches of painted skin sinking between their brittle ribs as they exhaled. How can they breathe? I wondered, given that the plastic edges of the mask seemed to be continuous with their neck. I was no closer to an answer to that question when the police arrived a few minutes later. I implored them to arrest the intruder, begging them to see reason, praying their view matched my own. They looked at the thing on my couch and snickered, eyes gleaming with amusement. I shouldn't have expected them to take the request seriously. How could I? It was just a cat, after all. The police graciously escorted me to the emergency room. Not in cuffs, thankfully, not that time. All the tests were unremarkable. The clear fluid they drew from my spine didn't show signs of an infection agitating my nervous system. The urine drug screen came back positive, but only for opioids, and the doctor expected that given I was on naltrexone. The med helped dull any residual cravings for my old vices, alcohol and cocaine, but shared a chemical similarity to oxycodone. My kidneys, my heart, my liver, every organ seemed to be in working order. Far as the doctor could tell, there wasn't anything wrong with me, and I hadn't ingested anything they believed could inspire psychosis. But when the psychiatrist asked, I remained insistent. That thing wasn't a cat. From there, my trajectory was set. Next stop, Falling Leaves Behavioral Health Hospital. The first time wasn't too bad. My fellow captives were tolerable, and the docs were nice enough. Smart, too. They eventually had me believing I was suffering under an isolated delusion precipitated by extreme stress. Their words, not mine. Initially, I rejected the theory. The more I considered it, though, the more it seemed to click into place. Undeniably, work had been taxing, and no one else saw Raja as I did. Occam's razor suggested something was wrong with me rather than everyone else. Not Ike, not Julie, and not the police. Just me. 5 days later, I was discharged. Ike was ecstatic, jumping up and down in the back seat of our sedan, wrapping a pair of little hands around my shoulders as I clicked the passenger seat safety belt into the holster. Julie was more reticent about my release, but she did a good job faking happiness for Ike's sake. I was the last to enter when we got home. My feet felt thickly calcified to our stone stoop. It took Julie holding my hand to get me inside, practically yanking me over the threshold. The door swung shut behind me. Electricity sizzled up the curves of my neck as I scanned my surroundings. Julie ran her thumb delicately across my palm. The massage was tender and affectionate, but I sensed a similar electricity hissing along her skin. She was nervous too, and in retrospect, she had every right to be. I saw no masked intruder. My static calmed. I turned to Julie and shot her a flimsy smile. Then there was a noise above us. A quiet, inscrutable message. A painful reminder. Knock. 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 My body became a live wire. Julie's thumb dug vicious stigmata into my palm, having sensed my panic. I glanced up, and there they were, lying prone on the balcony that overlooked our foyer, all but their mask wreathed in deep shadow, knocking the poor, oversized facsimile of Raja's skull against the banister's small wooden pillars, alternating left to right, right to left, left to right. Knock. 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 The lead psychiatrist at Falling Leaves informed me I went absolutely ballistic at the mere sight of our innocent house cat, and that my stay the second time around would be longer. Much longer. I don't recall going ballistic, though. I have no memory of what transpired between seeing them again and the point at which I arrived at the psychiatric hospital. All I remember is their terrible pendulous sway extending on into infinity. A video on a frozen computer screen, constantly refreshing but never righting itself, never moving on, perpetually misaligned and distorted. A part of me never left that moment. A part of me is still there, watching, helpless. Knock. 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 Julie still visited me over the following 3 months, but only weekly, and she wasn't bringing Ike with her. Not only that, but judging by the way her cheekbones had begun progressively sharpening, she wasn't eating. The stress of it all was getting to her, and that fact killed me. At first I pleaded. Said things like, "I'm not insane. I know what I saw." And, "For the love of God, Julie, you and Ike aren't safe." All she did in response was avert her eyes. My pleas were falling on deaf ears, and the only thing those outbursts were earning me was a longer sentence at Falling Leaves Behavioral Health Hospital. It was a tough pill to swallow, but I realized that feigning recovery from my delusion was the most logical step forward. So that's what I did. Slowly but surely, I recovered. even endorsed during a group therapy session that I'd been covertly indulging in some designer PCP-like drugs. Drugs that wouldn't come up on a routine test, but certainly could send a mind through the proverbial garbage disposal. The psychiatrist seemed to buy it, hook, line and sinker. 108 grueling days later, my wife brought me home. Her lips twitched as she drove. Her eyes were glassy and bloodshot. She'd lost a significant amount of weight, 20 pounds, maybe more. They were right inside the door when I opened it. Preening on their back beside our welcome mat, body contorted into a lazy stretch, silently beseeching a stomach scratch. I watched her anxiety flourish into outright panic, knees fluttering, breathing sharp and shallow. Her eyes flashed to me, then to what she saw as our defenseless cat, and back again, petrified about what I might do. Before she could pull her phone from her bag, I was bending down, rubbing my fingers against their belly. Its skin was doughy but disturbingly coarse, like partially congealed flour with grains of asphalt mixed into the batter. As I suppressed a gag, I felt the silky touch of Julie's hand on my shoulder. "So good to have you back, Marvin," she whispered. I nodded, still rubbing. The dead eyes of their painted mask pointed at me. Julie walked away. As soon as she was out of earshot, I stood up and retracted my hand, which was now coated in a fine, grey, odourless dust. Something was different about them. Their abdomen seemed fuller than before. The solution to this mess, as I imagined it, appeared relatively straightforward. I didn't need to understand them. I didn't need to know what they were, why only I could appreciate their true form and what their purpose in my home was. I just needed to kill them. Thus, I needed my family incapacitated, unable to intervene. So I dosed them. 1 milligram of lorazepam for Ike, 4 milligrams of lorazepam for Julie. For the record, benzodiazepines were never my vice. I mean, who wants to sleep through their high? Never made much sense to me. Still, I had use for them outside of hedonism as a sort of biochemical kill switch. Having the shakes from alcohol withdrawal, take a lorazepam. Coke got you a little too revved up, take a lorazepam. Thankfully, I was able to locate a dusty pill bottle stashed under a floorboard in the attic, a relic from my days as a fiend. It wasn't as dramatic as something like chloroform. They both just became incredibly drowsy after downing some spiked lemonade, neither very interested in having leftovers prior to turning in for the evening. I helped them up the stairs, and that was that. Both were out like a light in no time. Ike told me he loved me. Julie reminded me to feed Raja 3 times. She might have her suspicions in the morning, and I figured she'd be distraught to find Raja missing, but I'd cross that bridge when I came to it. As I drew Ike's bedroom door closed, there they were, lying on their belly in the hallway, absent-mindedly flicking water around their bowl with their seemingly nailless human fingers. That moment was the first pleasurable one I'd experienced since the whole damn ordeal began. They were making it easy for me. I tiptoed across the carpet, gaze ripe with beautiful violence, and when I was close enough, I knelt down and straddled the intruder. They writhed, attempting to get out from under me. It was no use. Only then did I experience a brief smoldering curiosity about what was hidden beneath. I clasped my hands at the point where its mask and neck became indistinguishable and began wrenching it upwards. A deluge of endorphins set my blood on fire. My entire body radiated blissful warmth. This fever dream was finally going to be over. When the mask started to give, as threads of anchoring sinew started to snap, that's when I heard their howls. Both Julie and Ike, wailing in discordant unity. Paternal instinct got me upright. Before my conscious mind could even register the circumstances, I was kneeling beside my son. He was sitting straight up, shoulders tensed to hell and back, eyes rolled into his skull, and God, there was blood. Tiny crimson dewdrops formed a ring around his neck, exactly where I'd been tearing at the mask. His screams grew fainter. After a few seconds, he fell back limply onto his pillow, almost as if he'd passed out from within a dream. Only then did the wails completely die. Then the house was utterly silent. Julie had stopped too. Whatever I did to them, it seemed to translate to my family. They were connected, tethered. I turned around, nearly toppling back onto Ike from the shock of what I saw. They were there, in the doorway, standing on 2 feet. Raja's stretched, vacant face stared daggers into me. Gradually it got back on all fours, pawed past me, climbed onto Ike's bed, and curled up at his feet. And I just stood there, paralyzed. The message was obvious. They didn't need a voice for me to understand. Checkmate. The next morning, as I stewed over a mug of lukewarm coffee at the kitchen table, Julie approached me holding her pillowcase. "Hey, glad to see you up so early." I nodded, keeping my eyes fixed on the black liquid. "What do you make of these stains? Smells a hell of a lot like blood, and it wasn't there before I went to bed. I thought I saw some dried blood on my neck, but I looked myself up and down in the mirror and it doesn't seem like I have a scratch on me. I don't know, it's just weird." She dropped the pillowcase onto the table and returned to her morning routine. A blotchy, maroon-colored oval marred the light blue fabric, no bigger than a quarter. Flecks of coagulation dislodged as I scraped my thumbnail over the stain, but as I put it to my nose and sniffed, I didn't detect even a hint of that sickly sweet, iron-kissed scent. Yep, smells like blood to me. Strange," I replied, draping the pillowcase over the top of a nearby chair. "Right?" She paced out into the foyer and began calling for Ike. After years of snorting cocaine, my sense of smell was effectively non-existent. Rarely, I'd get a faint whiff of something, but it'd have to be exceptionally fragrant to wake up my fried nerves, and it was always fleeting. Julie didn't know that, though. I was used to lying about it, too embarrassed to reveal the lengths to which I'd ravaged my body at the altar of feeling good. My eyes darted to the pantry. There was a muffled tapping coming from the inside. The clack of my wife's heels echoed as she moved to open the door. The intruder spilled out, mask thudding against the floor, cans of beans and boxes of spaghetti toppling over like bowling pins. "Raja, you goof, there you are," Julie cooed. They got on all fours and began shaking violently, airing out their hypothetical fur, causing a cloud of pale dust to collect around them. Once settled, they tilted their mask up to look at my wife. She stared back at them, silent, grinning. After a moment, she turned to me and said, "Wow, he is vocal today, good Lord." At no point did I hear anything from them. Julie paced out of the kitchen, chuckling to herself. I glared at the intruder. They had everyone else fooled, and I couldn't seem to pinpoint what made me so damn special. Suddenly I had an idea. What if something in my blood was allowing me to see through the illusion? Could I be genetically immune? I pulled my phone from my pocket, walked up to them, and snapped a quick picture. Then I texted my brother. "Free for dinner tonight? Ike would love to see his uncle." Dan and I weren't estranged, but we weren't on great terms either. He lived about an hour away and had his own shit to deal with. More than that, though I'd said some things better left unsaid while still in the throes of substance abuse, he'd kept me at arm's length ever since. I towered over the indecipherable devil, the haunting melody of my spellbound wife and son, laughing upstairs, thumping against my eardrums. My hand buzzed. "Sure, good to hear from you. Car's out of commission. Mind picking me up?" "Happy to," I replied. Then, with no context, I forwarded him the picture I'd just taken and waited. The dots of a pending reply appeared across my phone screen. My heart racketed around my ribcage. My life teetered on what he saw. "Ew, what the fuck is that, Marv?" Relief washed over me. "Tell you more later. Be there at 5. I peered down at them and smiled wide, baring my teeth. Most of the trip home from Dan's was silent. I was too nervous to hold a conversation, manically tapping on the steering wheel, thoughts spinning. As we were pulling off the interstate, he broke that silence, but not in the way I was expecting. "Hey, you haven't taken anything, right? Still on the wagon, so to speak?" he asked. Automatically, I responded, "What? No, God, I wish." Each small word came out swift and punctuated. Even with just my peripheral vision, I could tell he was giving me that look, a pitying condescension that always felt like a splash of acid gnawing at my skin, the type of look that used to reliably throw me into a rage at a moment's notice. I swallowed and rolled my shoulders, focused my attention on the heat from the setting sun cascading through the windshield, rather than the resentment bubbling in my veins. "Things at home have been better," I sighed. Talk about an understatement, but what else could I say? Where would I even start? I lost my job. I was in a psychiatric hospital for months. There's a demon eunuch dressed as my house cat, and only I can tell. No. He'd think I'd gone off the deep end. Once he saw it for himself, then I'd be able to spill my guts. Once he understood, then we could strategize. "I'm sure it's not as bad as you." He paused, sniffing the air. A bout of harsh, vigorous coughing took hold of him. His eyes became glassy and red. I considered pulling over by our town's welcome sign, but he waved for me to keep going as I flicked my turn signal on. "Sorry," he sputtered. "Allergies really have been a bitch this year." The fit abruptly dissipated. When I looked over, he didn't seem concerned, and his breathing was steady, so I just kept going. A minute later, we pulled into my driveway. Hours passed before dinner was ready. We chatted, gave Dan copious updates about Ike, and even had time to play a few games of backgammon while the roast cooked. He continued to cough, but the fits were smaller, more contained. Honestly, he didn't even seem to notice them. All the while, Raja never showed their face. Dread crawled over my skin like termites through wood, but I kept my cool. They'd come. Around 8, the 4 of us sat down to eat. Lines of steam rose above the glistening pile of meat at the center of the table. Ike, wanting to come off as a proper gentleman, insisted on serving us, dropping asymmetric portions of beef, mashed potatoes, and baked asparagus across each of our plates. "All right, dig in," Julie announced. My son descended ravenously. Still on edge, I gingerly mixed the gravy into the potatoes, eyes darting between each of the 3 entrances to our kitchen. That's when I noticed something peculiar about Julie. She was holding her utensils upright, a fork in one hand, a knife in the other, but she wasn't moving, eyes locked on me but glazed over. "Honey, everything okay?" The only part of her that budged was her lips. Why wouldn't I be? Stomach twisting into agonizing knots, I turned to Dan. He was swiping at this meal, but every time his fork missed. A little too high, a little too far left. Over and over and over again. "Julie, this roast is something else," he muttered. Abruptly, my wife released her grip, utensils clattering against the plate. "Wow, I am stuffed," she proclaimed. Julie sprang from her chair. "Might as well give Raja the leftovers." She balled her hand into a fist, brought it close to her face, and began knocking on her forehead. The resulting sound had an unnaturally pervasive resonance, like hot water running through a loose copper pipe, metal expanding and colliding against an adjacent wall. Knock, knock, knock. A series of wild thuds emanated from the foyer, a bevy of hands and feet and knees crashing down the stairs, the frenzied stampede of a starving animal. As the masked intruder charged into the room, Julie walked over to his dinner bowl and dumped her entire meal into it, pieces haphazardly ricocheting onto the side of a cabinet and the surrounding floor. Suddenly, I realized I hadn't seen her eat anything substantial since I left for that trip months prior. A few slices of toast with her coffee in the morning, but nothing more. Dan pivoted to face them as they entered. I held my breath. He swung to me. His eyes were rolled back into his skull, white balls of tapioca adorned with a latticework of bright capillaries, tiny red worms wading through a thick ooze. I was wondering when the little guy would show up. I've missed him. My heart buckled, my mind fractured. Identically, my brother sprung to his feet, grabbed his plate, and dumped it in front of them. "Might as well give Raja the leftovers. Pets have to be fed, and we don't want Ike to be the one to feed them, right? No, of course not. We want the best for our prodigy. We want them to grow. We then want to thrive, right? Right?" The intruder hastily gathered the tribute into their arms, gravy smearing an impromptu Rorschach test along their trunk, and then began galloping past the table. At some point, Ike had gotten up and was standing by the screen door, creaking it open so they could careen into the backyard without losing an ounce of momentum. For months, this must have been the routine. Looking at Ike, I found myself at a crossroads. I could just give up, allow my family to be eaten away from the inside out, until there was nothing left, until they'd been made hollow. Hell, it wouldn't be hard, and who knows? Weak and empty, they might not even have the brain power to notice if indulged in a vice or two on the side. A family that would stick around no matter what I did to myself. I wanted that at some point, right? Or I could give chase to that incomprehensible thing, that fucking parasite. Even if it felt hopeless, completely and utterly insurmountable, I could still try. Blood thrumming, heart burning, I shot up and followed them into the moonless night. It's currently 11 p.m. When I finally arrived home, Ike and Julie were sleeping soundly, and Dan was gone. But I don't know where he got to since I drove him. There are holes in the forest, burrows, tunnels. I watched the intruder dive into one, still holding the food. When I put my ear to the hole, I heard something. Mewing. Multiple identical, high-pitched yowls, overlaid with each other. Sounded exactly like Raja when we forgot to fill his bowl. Hungry begging, but in eerie triplicate. I never considered what happened to the real him until that moment. If that truly is our original house cat, lurking deep in the hole. That's not all, though. On the way back, I passed by Mr. Hooper. He lives 2 doors down from us. He was walking what he believed was his husky. The man looked like he'd dropped 30 pounds since I last saw him. It's not just happening to my family. I think the whole town is infested. Not sure what to do next. Search for Dan. Return to the hole. It's unclear, but I'll figure it out. I'm publishing this in case something happens to me. Julie, if you're reading this, I'm not crazy. I love you, and I tried. Story 2. Take it from me, some jobs aren't worth doing no matter how good the money is, or how much shit you're willing to overlook for the sake of an easy life. I've worked the doors of more dive bars, brothels and bad businesses than I can count, seen things that would make a better man quit, people fighting to bloody unconsciousness in the street, kids ODing while passers-by stepped over or around them, women drunk and spewing in the gutter and still being ushered in by club owners hanging over them like mosquitoes on stale water. Dead men frozen to death for want of a home while folks lined up only a few feet away to spend their money on booze in the warm. I saw all this and kept on working with my head down, never complained as long as my pay ended up in my wallet, and it's taken me this long to be sorry for that. I was not a good man, and I knew it. It was my lack of any moral scruples at that time that landed me a security gig at a military lab. The wage was good and the work was easy, and that was all I cared to know. My job was to guard a live specimen they had living in a back room of the building, the only action I saw from day to day being to let scientists or the orderlies responsible for feeding and cleanup in or out. It was quiet, repetitive labor, the kind I liked. I liked the other guards on duty too. The guys that ended up doing most of my shifts with me were around my age, leading me to fall in with them and their way of joking around to keep things interesting on the slow days. Had I known what I do now, I would have kept my distance from them, stayed alert and discouraged that kind of horseplay. But in the end, I was as much to blame for what went down as they were, and maybe even a little more. Still, sometimes I wonder if what happened to us was inevitable, a secondary experiment set up by the military without our knowledge. Maybe we were chosen for our youth, the conditions we worked in purposefully built with far less protections than we were led to believe. At this point, nothing would shock me less. And intentional or not, I'm sure those scientists were grateful for their findings. The animal in the room we were guarding had come from a forest somewhere. The locals in that anonymous location, generally suspicious of any military presence in the area, had supposedly led representatives right into the creature's habitat, suggesting that it had been a nuisance to them that they were glad to be rid of. Now it was a military asset and effectively their prisoner, though to this day I don't know if that thing was aware enough to realize it, or if it did to care. Every few days, we guards were required to release the complex lock system on the cell door to allow scientists through to conduct their experiments with the creature. Or, more accurately, with the unlucky men and women they brought into that room with them. Hostages, I guessed, or long-term jailbirds, hoping to reduce their sentences by volunteering to take part in human trials. They'd be dragged out of that cell sweaty and staggering, clearly affected by some influence within. I figured the creature was being used as some form of living torture device, though it never moved much except when the orderlies brought in live rats or insects for it to eat, which it did slowly and without any visible interest in its handlers. For this reason, none of us on security were particularly afraid of it, though we knew more or less what it could do. We'd witnessed both janitors and scientists go in with headphones over their ears, which we were also required to wear when opening the doors. From watching through a reinforced glass panel, we deduced that the creature made some sound that affected the poor saps brought in to meet it. You'd see its body trembling as they entered, the rudimentary hole it had as a mouth falling open over its flat teeth. Its back legs would rub together, and not knowing the difference between a grasshopper or any other kind of insect behavior, everybody on security took to calling it Jiminy Cricket, or sometimes just Jim. "They're going in with Jim," we'd say to each other whenever we got a call through to prepare the doors for the scientists and their human subjects to pass. Poor bastard doesn't know what he's in for. Neither did we. Our guesswork never even came close. Through the long, quiet hours in between test days, my team and I would end up talking about the thing that we were guarding. Kidding around, really, mainly to shuck off some of the unease that came of extended periods alone with our charge. While we weren't scared of it per se, it wasn't comfortable to look at. The cricket had an oily, hard-shelled exterior, its bald head eyeless, but vaguely humanoid. Its limbs might have been two, only all six were folded backwards like a bug's and tapered into fingerless ends. The creature was smaller than the average man, or looked to be until the fleshy brown sheets it had as wings opened out, which they sometimes did while it ate, taking up half the wall. The cricket could have overpowered any of its keepers easily if it wanted to, but I guess it hadn't the smarts to try, or else it had enough to know it was onto a good thing getting food and board with so little effort on its part. No one on security knew much about it, except what we could see for ourselves. The docs wouldn't tell us anything and shut us down whenever we tried to ask. As far as we knew, the only risk the creature posed to human beings was in the cry it made when anyone approached, and even then the symptoms appeared to be temporary, wearing off as the subjects were led away from the room. At that point we hadn't heard the noise ourselves due to the mandatory headphones, as well as the walls and doors of the cell being heavily soundproofed. We wanted to know what exactly could be so bad about it that grown adults would start retching and crawling around on the floor to get away from it, and there was no way of finding out without experiencing it with our own ears. It didn't occur to us that it was better to leave our curiosities well alone. We were all barely more than kids at the time, bored and stupid and worn down by all we'd seen into a dangerous apathy. Besides, the human subjects had always come out of that room alive, and so we had no reason to think the sound would cause any lasting damage. One shift we started seriously planning how to go about our personal experiment without being fired. We had full control over the security cameras, which could be switched on or off from outside the room, as well as the lock system, making it easy for us to enter and exit rapidly, and so avoid being caught. My youngest colleague, Carson, volunteered to go in first. At 22, he looked a good 5 years younger, stood bouncing on his heels and whistling, full of adrenaline. "Let me in, boys," he said. "I'm ready." We did as we were told, the heavy doors sliding apart as we released the locks, then closing at Carson's back. Watching him through the glass panel, my other colleague Stanmer and I made mocking gestures at him, our headphones secured over our ears. We were all confident he'd be in and out quicker than the regular subjects, who only ended up in the cell for so long because we kept the doors shut fast against their pounding fists and mouthed pleas for freedom. Carson would be out in seconds, we thought, with a sore head for his troubles, and nothing more. He grinned at us over his shoulder, taking narrow steps towards the cricket until it shifted on the wall. "Look at that asshole," Stanmer commented fondly. I only knew what he said from reading his lips. "He's gonna regret this. Just watch." The cricket's mouth opened, and even from a distance and behind thick glass we could see its weird limbs rattling together. Though I couldn't hear it, I felt a sort of vibration through my skull, and glancing at Stanmer I knew he felt it too. "Here we go," I said. "It's singing." Carson was listening, stood with his back to us in a kind of trance. This wasn't unusual for initial subject reactions, so Stanmer and I just chuckled a little, nudging each other back and forth. Then Carson started twitching violently like a body caught in a hail of gunfire and dropped to the floor, making no attempt to claw to the exit the way we'd all agreed to when it got too much. It occurred to me as I watched him convulse that he wasn't fully conscious, that none of the subjects had been until they'd been pulled up onto their feet and beyond the doors, beyond the cricket's song. It was when I saw the dark stain spreading through Carson's pants and across the steel-tiled floor that I knew for sure he was out of it. "Shit," I said, and facing Stanmer I added, "Go in and get him. I'll stay out here and get the doors." I reopened the cell and stepped aside before Stanmer had the chance to complain about it. He mouthed something at me, then, realizing I couldn't understand him, just shrugged and went on in. Unaffected by the cricket, Stanmer walked directly to Carson and grabbed him under both arms in order to drag his dead weight towards the exit. The moment he put his hands on him, Carson's slack body started seizing and kicking all over again, his jaw dropping open in what I could only assume was a scream. Stanmer did his best to keep on pulling him over to the door, and almost succeeded until one of Carson's flailing arms hit him in the ear, knocking his headphones off onto the floor. Immediately he went rigid, his face twisting towards the creature with an expression of horror unlike anything I'd seen outside of a movie. Rather than drop like Carson, Stanmer's response was to continue hauling our friend towards the door with one hand, the other scrambling to pick up the headphones and drag them back down over his ears again. I couldn't tell whether the two of them were in physical pain, nauseated, or had gone crazy with fear. I figured it was all three at once, and understood that if I left them in that cell any longer, I could end up with two stiffs on my hands I'd have to explain away to our higher-ups. Again, I activated the lock release, moving back as the two men collapsed through the entryway, breathing too hard to speak. When I bent down to help Carson onto his feet, he grasped at my face, wrenching one ear of the headphones off me and pointing with his other hand at the creature on the wall. "Listen," he said, or I think he did. I could barely hear him over its noise. "You better fucking listen too." Later, he'd tell me that hurt and spite had driven him to do what he'd done, that he couldn't bear the idea of any one of us getting away unscathed. He said he couldn't remember exactly what he'd experienced in the noise, wouldn't until much later, when everything went to shit, but that he was sorry anyway. I think he meant it then. I really think he did. Still, I resented him for forcing me to listen even when I understood why. In the few seconds the headphones left my ears, I heard the cricket's song, more like the guttural hum of many men together than any kind of insect. Under it was a dull whining that seemed to stab through my ear and out through my eye with an agony so deep I would have beaten my brains out of my skull on the floor to be rid of it. Still, the worst of that sound was not what I heard, but the things it put into my head. Thoughts that, like my colleagues, I'd forget even as we lay sweating and cursing against the locked door of that cell. I remember the terror of that imagery, the horror and disgust with myself for being able to conceive of such things, and I remember that I'd enjoyed some of what I'd glimpsed, had wanted it to go on and to end with the same crazed strength. How I got out of there and locked up I still don't know, only that I was the one to do it. Later it was Stanmer that, with headphones safely secured, cleaned up the inside of the cell and helped Carson get himself together. The kid was almost mute, shaking and chucking his guts up in the nearest bathroom for almost 2 hours. Once our shift was over, the three of us stood smoking together by our cars, our hands trembling like we were drunk. "What did you see, Mac?" asked Carson. I looked hard at him, but saw nothing but an innocent questioning in his eyes. "Hell if I know," I said, "but if I'd hung around in there like you, I would have been in a wooden box by tomorrow. I can tell you that much. You want to know what I think? The military's going to kill with that cricket, and they're going to take out however many civilians are in hearing range of their targets. They won't give a damn." Carson looked like he might pass out again. "Come on, guys. We knew who we were working for," said Stanmer. "Don't act like you didn't see something like this coming." But he said it gently, with sympathy. He'd experienced the sound too, after all, and had hated it as much as we had. "We should quit," said Carson. "I ain't sticking around. This is too fucked up. I'm out." I would have gladly gone with him, but I couldn't admit it. "If we drop out this early into the game, the bosses'll know something's up," I said. "And if they know we're bailing with classified information on our hands, we're all in deep shit. We need to lie low for a while, play it cool." It seemed unfair to point out that Stanmer and I wouldn't have heard anything at all if Carson hadn't freaked the way he did, though both of us were thinking it. We knew he'd taken the cricket song the hardest, and we couldn't kick him while he was down. "Christ," said Carson queasily. "I don't know if I can do this." "Tough shit," said Stanmer, and flicked his cigarette away into the snow. "We were dumb enough to open that door. We got to be smart enough to see this shit out to the end." So we kept working at the lab for another couple of weeks without event, though Carson was jumpy and looked green around the gills every time we opened a door for the cleaners or the next sorry subject to be sent in. He couldn't even bring himself to look through the glass panel anymore. Stanmer became fascinated with it. He'd always have his face to that window, his breath steaming it white. "I heard the locals used to put tree gum in their ears so the cricket couldn't get to them," Stanmer said once. "The noise is to keep competition out of its territory, or some shit. Must be more of them out there, somewhere." I looked at the cheap paint job on the wall and tried to ignore him, hoping that if I did, he'd drop the subject. By then, I'd decided the less I knew about that creature, the better, wishing I'd minded my business like I had all those other times before. It was 5 a.m. on a Monday that I got an unexpected phone call just before my alarm went off for a rare morning shift. Cursing, I answered my cell. "Stanmer," I said, "you've got to be fucking with me. What is it?" "Look at social media, man," he said. "You still got accounts, right? Any of them. Open them up. Check the news articles. Now." His voice was dull and dark. I'd never heard him talk that way before, and it sent something through me deeper than cold. I pulled up one of my barely used profiles online and started to scroll. Immediately, the same headline was being shared by every page and person I followed. I clicked a link to one of the articles and sat reading it in the early morning darkness. There had been a mass shooting at an office block in the next town over. Every man and woman leaving after work, gunned down before they had the chance to comprehend what was happening. Even the security had been taken out. The shooter had access to all the doors and an in-depth understanding of the building's layout and weak points. The young man had entered, slaughtering the occupants in relative silence until police had arrived at the scene, hoping to apprehend him. At this point, the shooter, covered in blood and visibly distressed for the first time since the incident began, started shouting at the officers from an open window. "I saw it," he said. "I heard it, and then I saw it. I wanted it. I didn't want to, but I did. I wanted to do it." Then he turned the gun on himself and had blown a bullet through one ear and out of his left eye, dying instantly. I couldn't stop replaying the clips that had been taken from the scene, pausing on that bulge-eyed, tormented face, a face I knew, had seen daily at my side for months on end, smiling and laughing. I didn't dare bring the shooting up at the lab, where Stanmer and I regarded Carson's replacement in distrustful silence. Only after our shift had ended did we even mention his name, crammed knee to knee in a tiny bar at the fringes of town. "He must have been fired from security at that office years ago," I said, trying to pretend that I hadn't been dissecting and analyzing Carson's dying words obsessively all morning. "Must have had a grudge, decided to go back and see it through." "Nah," said Stanmer, shaking his head. "Maybe that's the way they'll spin it, but he never worked there a day in his life. Never even knew shit about it until he went in with Jim that day. See, Carson turned up at my place last night just before it all went down. Asked if I remembered anything else about that cricket. I said no, and how I planned on keeping it that way. So that's when Carson told me it was all coming back to him. When the cricket sung to him, he started seeing flashes of what he was going to do at that office building, knew how to get there, how to get around, even how he'd feel doing it, the murder, how he'd kill himself when it was over. Hell, he said he even liked the idea, even though he swore he never thought that way before. He said he was scared he was going to drive out there and do it that same night. "Like shit you are," I said. "What would you go and shoot a bunch of people for just because some bug in a cage told you to?" The way he looked at me, Jesus, I'm getting chills just thinking about it. He had those crazy eyes. "You know, that smile. I want to do it," he said. "I know how good it's gonna be. Just as sweet as that song." Then I swear he started humming, and it was like that cricket sounded, all those voices, but it was just him standing there. Stanmer took a drink, looking at his glass like he wished he'd never get to the end of it. "Why the fuck didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked him. "We could have done something, stopped him." "I took Carson's gun," said Stanmer, "made him promise to go and see a doctor in the morning. He calmed down, seemed like I got through to him. You know? But I guess he had another gun somewhere and just went out of town instead and did just what he said he would." I pushed my own glass away, sickened by it. "Jesus," I said. "So, what? You think the cricket made him go crazy? That he wouldn't have done it if he hadn't gone in there with it?" Stanmer made a face. "I ain't saying that. I think it brought it out of him. Found something in his head, just a dark thought like we all have. Sometimes, potential, you know, and instead of being just a thought, suddenly it was something he wanted." I swallowed back a thick ball of saliva and stood up. "Well, you better tell me if you start remembering that shit in the lab. All right? If you start wanting to shoot anybody, hell, I'll tie you down if I have to. Just talk. You hear me?" Stanmer laughed uncomfortably. He wasn't the opening up to people type, more the quiet kind that stepped in when others needed something from him. "Sure," said Stanmer. "Same to you, Mac." "I mean it." Stanmer held his hands up in defeat. "All right? Fuck. I swear it. I don't remember a damn thing I saw when Jim was singing, but if I do, you'll be the first to know. I wasn't." A week later, it was Stanmer's face I saw in the news in an old photograph of him and his wife Amelia, laughing together on a trip they'd taken the previous year. One night, Stanmer had taken a knife to bed with him and stuck it in and out of Amelia so many times that when the cops turned up, they couldn't tell if the thing on the mattress with him was even human until they saw the bones. After killing his wife, Stanmer had driven that same blade through his own ear with such force and at such a severe angle that it had emerged through his left eye. Shouldn't have been possible, the professionals stated, but he'd done it all the same. News reports claimed that there had been text messages recovered between Stanmer and his wife where he'd discussed having violent thoughts, and that he was handing in his notice at work and moving out of the family home until they passed. Amelia had begged him to stay, saying they'd see a doctor together, and so he'd come home and promptly murdered her. The same old story, people said, a jealous husband turning like that. It was never out of the blue. They'd find some hint in his past, if they went looking, and then it'd all make sense. But though maybe there was a streak of that kind of violence in Stanmer, I knew what had brought it out of him. Imagined him humming under his breath as he'd driven up to the house that night, a hum like many voices in one. Something's going to come out in me too, soon, if I don't make a move. I'm going back to that lab again tomorrow for one reason, and that's to put a pair of those headphones on and shoot that cricket through whatever soft spot in its shell I can find. Maybe that'll stop what's happening to me, maybe it won't. If it does, the military will probably find a way to get rid of me anyway. Something quiet and convenient you'll never hear about, but I've made my peace with that. I've started thinking about my mother, you see, and how I've always hated her. I know how I'd kill her if I did it, and I know that it would feel good to me. Story 3. I moved into that apartment in the summer of 2003. It was a quiet building on the edge of town, 6 units, a cracked parking lot, and a small patch of grass out front that the landlord swore he'd turn into a garden someday. The rent was cheap, and I'd just gotten my first steady job at a hardware store, so I didn't care that the walls were thin or that the ceiling creaked when someone walked above me. It was mine, my first place alone. The first week, I barely noticed the man upstairs. Sometimes I'd hear the faint thump of footsteps around midnight, or the sound of a TV playing static too loud. I figured he worked late. Everyone in the building seemed quiet, the kind of small-town people who don't ask questions. Then, around the 3rd week, I started waking up at 3 a.m. sharp, every night. It wasn't a nightmare that woke me, or any loud noise. It was the silence, that strange, heavy kind of silence that makes you aware of your own heartbeat. Then I'd hear it, a slow, dragging sound from the ceiling, like someone moving furniture an inch at a time. At first, I tried to ignore it. I'd turn over, tell myself the guy was just rearranging his place, but after a few nights, it got weird. The sound didn't move normally. It would stop right above my bed, stay still for minutes, then shift to the corner of the room. Once, I heard something like humming. Not a song, more like someone whispering to themselves without words. When I told my landlord, he shrugged. "Oh, that's probably Mr. Clark," he said. "He's been there for years. Retired fella, keeps to himself." So I left it at that. But a few days later, I ran into the lady from 2B while checking my mail. She was in her 60s, always wearing pink slippers. I asked her if she knew Mr. Clark. She frowned. "Sweetheart, nobody's lived in 3A since last winter. That apartment's empty." I laughed awkwardly, thinking she must be mistaken. But that night, when I looked up toward the window above mine, there was a faint light on, flickering blue, like a TV. I told myself maybe she just didn't notice someone moved in. The landlord wasn't exactly the type to update tenants about anything. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about it. So one evening I waited until I heard the footsteps. Then I went outside and looked up. The window was dark, no TV light, but I could still hear the slow creaking of floorboards. That's when I noticed something else. The sound wasn't above me anymore, it was inside my apartment. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, long enough for me to freeze in place, too afraid to breathe. Then it was gone. After that, things started changing subtly. My clock radio would reset to 3 o'clock every night. My bathroom mirror fogged up even when the shower hadn't run. And sometimes when I walked into my bedroom, it smelled faintly of old cigarettes, the kind my grandfather used to smoke. I started leaving the TV on for background noise. It helped for a while. Then one night I woke up and the TV had turned itself off. Static hissed from the screen for a moment, and then, faintly, I heard it again, that low, wordless humming. I called the landlord the next morning. He said he'd checked the apartment upstairs, but 2 days later he called back and told me the door was still locked and covered in dust. Nobody had been inside. I almost moved out then, but I was stubborn, broke, and tired of running from weird feelings, so I decided to prove to myself that there was a normal explanation. I borrowed a cheap tape recorder from the hardware store and left it on my nightstand before I went to bed. At 3 a.m. I woke up like clockwork. No sound, no movement, just that oppressive stillness. The next morning I played the tape. Nothing for the first few minutes, then faintly I heard it. Humming, and underneath it, something that made my stomach drop. My own voice, whispering words I couldn't make out. I threw the recorder away. Weeks passed. I stopped sleeping much. My co-workers noticed I was off, pale, jumpy, distracted. I told them I had insomnia. Then one night, I came home from a late shift and saw the light on upstairs again. I couldn't help it. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed the back stairs to 3A. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was coated in dust, a few pieces of furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The air smelled stale like mothballs and old wood. I was about to leave when I saw something carved into the wall near the window, deep scratches forming words. My flashlight flickered, and then, clear as day, I heard footsteps behind me, slow and deliberate. I turned around, but no one was there, just the sound of breathing that wasn't mine. I bolted down the stairs and didn't stop running until I was back in my car. I slept at a motel that night. When I returned the next day, the landlord was standing outside. He looked uneasy. "Saw your car gone all night," he said. "Listen, if you're hearing things, maybe you should know. Mr. Clark died in that apartment last year. Heart attack. They didn't find him for 3 days." I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded and went back inside my own place. That night I didn't hear any footsteps, no humming, nothing. For the first time in weeks, I slept straight through until morning. The strange part is, things felt better after that. My headaches stopped. The air in the apartment felt lighter, cleaner. But every once in a while, when I'm half asleep, I still hear faint humming through the wall. It doesn't scare me anymore. In a weird way, it's comforting, like he's still there, keeping me company. Sometimes I even hum back. I know how that sounds. Crazy, right? But after living alone for so long, I've learned that sometimes the quietest places aren't really empty. Sometimes the things we hear in the dark aren't trying to hurt us. They just don't want to be forgotten. And neither do I. I've kept that apartment ever since. The rent never went up and no one's asked to see 3A. If you drive by on a rainy night, you might notice one window glowing faint blue from an old TV. Don't worry about it. He's fine up there. And so am I. Story 4. I am writing this to you from a school-issued computer I hacked. The past few days have been surreal. It all started the first day of 6th grade. There was no sense that anything was wrong, just the crisp, late summer air. If anyone knew what would happen, they were doing a great job covering it up. Students from preschool to 8th grade were catching up with friends, renewing rivalries, and a slight sense of dread hanged in the air. I climbed up the stairs to the 2nd floor and entered my new classroom. My homeroom teacher was a relatively nice woman named Mrs. Combs, whom I'd had for math last year. I found my seat, next to an annoying boy, no surprise, and eyed the door for my fellow students. Groups of students walked in the door, each seemingly more energetic than the last. Once everyone was settled, my teacher began the boring lecture we always listened to at the beginning of the year about all the rules. I was in my own world, thinking about stories, murder mysteries, fantasy epics, and everything in between. That's when the weird started to happen. I heard 4 knocks on the door, bold, I know, and Mrs. Combs let them in. They were middle-aged men in black suits with name tags. "What are you here for?" I remember Mrs. Combs asking. "Them," they replied, motioning to us. "All of us." "You can't have them," Mrs. Combs started. "They're kids. You must have the wrong people." "I know we don't." The rest was a blur of screaming, kicking and lunging. I must have tried to fight back because one of them injected a serum into my brain. I woke up in what seemed to be a truck, sharing the trunk with the same kid who I was sitting next to in class, named Agastya. "Hi," he said casually, as if we were randomly coming across each other in the street and not stuffed in the back of a truck. I replied with the first thing I could think of. "What happened?" I was a long story, so I'll shorten it for you. According to him, there was lots more fighting and yelling until finally us kids got worn out and they loaded us into the trucks. I guess they were lazy, so they organized us according to Mrs. Combs' seating arrangements. No one knew where we were going, and it didn't seem like Mrs. Combs knew either. The rest of the long ride was pretty quiet, except for the occasional scared or the "what do you think's going to happen?" We finally got led out. I saw what seemed to be a military base, with the flat grey box of a building and barbed wire surrounding it. I think we were in the desert. Armed guards led us through the gates and inside, threatening to shoot if we metaphorically or literally stepped out of line. The inside of the building was just as drab as the outside. Grey walls surrounded us on all 4 sides. A man came out of another shadowy room. He was large and had a tough face like a drill sergeant. "Hello!" he said a little too loudly and happily. Some kids were angry. Some concerned, some confused, all scared. "I see you've arrived. Let me show you the rules," he said while unfolding a long piece of paper. The rules. No running. No yelling. No horseplay. Always wear your uniform. Shower once per day, no more and no less. Only visit your own dorm. You must eat all your meals with no seconds. Try hard on schoolwork. Comply to all demands. Never fight back. Do not break any off the rollers. You will face serious consequences, the man said, motioning to the armed men. Dorm assignments. Lucas, Sam, Yusuf, Danny, Jackson, boys Durham, A. A group of guards led them away from the rest of us. Boys door B. Another group of guards led those boys out, and the head man, I had named him Mr. Rage, continued with these assignments into the girls' dorms. More and more kids left, until only 5 of us girls remained. Mr. Rage confirmed that we were sleeping together. Girls' dorm C. The last group of guards led us down the hallway. It was narrow and dark, but we made it through. We ended up in a room with 3 bunk beds. Sophia, Anna, you're in bunk 1. One of the guards barked. Audrey, Viviana, bunk 2. Grace, bunk 3. All of you must change now. He led us further down the hall to the bathroom. 1 bathroom for more than 30 kids. There was already a long line, since we were the last group called. After lots of waiting, it was finally my turn to go in. It was old, outhouse quality. I managed to take my clothes off and go number 1. I put on the uniform. It was white, not calming white, but more of a sterile white, like you would see on a lab coat. I exited the bathroom. The only person after me was Viviana. We all waited for her to come out. Okay, Mr. Rage shouted. Time for lunch. The guards took us to what seemed to be the cafeteria, with many tables. The guards told us to get into the lunch line. The cafeteria workers gave us a few crackers and some sludge. This is lunch? Danny exclaimed. He made a mistake. Mr. Rage seemed angrier than usual. I managed to force down the sludge. I was ready to puke. 5 minutes later, Mr. Rage shouted again. Time for class! The guards forced us into a room with many desks. Computers lined the desks. You will be tested on your academic skills. You will receive personalized lesson plans based on this. Start! I tried to scramble what little algebra I could remember after today's chaos. But Mr. Rage soon came back. Time for sacrifice! Sacrifice? They pushed us down the stairs to a basement and put us into glass capsules alphabetically. The capsule doors locked behind me, and I was alone. Soon, the platform under my feet rose. Click, ka-chunk, ka-chunk, ka-click, chunk. The platform made some more of those noises, until finally I saw my fellow students in capsules in a circle around another gigantic grey platform in the middle. Mr. Rage was in a glass box in the ceiling. Mr. Lionel will greet you. Mr. Lionel. What seemed to be Mr. Lionel emerged from behind Mr. Rage. He was skinny, young, and had narrow, scary eyes. He looked like the human version of a snake. Hello, children, he said calmly, devoid of emotion. It is time to vote. Each of you will receive a small piece of paper and a pen. You will write the name of the person in your class you want dead on the paper. Dead? I will take the papers back from you when you finish. The person with the most votes will face a gruesome death tomorrow. Papers. Mr. Rage pulled a lever up in the box at this command. Each of us received a paper and pen. Strategically, I should want the person who hates me most to be dead, so I have a lesser chance at getting voted out if we continue to do this later. Time. I quickly wrote Danny's name on the paper, since he's my worst enemy in the class. Mr. Rage pressed a button, and a vacuum appeared over my head, sucking up my pen, paper, and some of my hair. Oh, and one more thing. Mr. Lionel added, you children cannot speak, or it's automatic death for you. Today's the next day. I didn't have a good night's rest, but quite the opposite. My night was full of nightmares, mostly of me trying to escape but getting held by the leg by Mr. Lionel. Last night's dinner, today's breakfast, and today's lunch were just as awful as yesterday's lunch. I am writing to you during today's class period. Since I figured out how to hack the computer, I have tried dreaming up ways to escape, but the guards and electric fence will stop me before I even breathe in fresh air. If anyone has any ideas on how to escape, get revenge, or just not die, I'd love to hear it. I'll check back in with you tomorrow.